All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello, and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, a talky and touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. I am Sasha Wolf, and I am joined, as usual, by my friend and producer, Mr. Michael Chauvin-Dalton. Hello, Michael.
Hey there. You know, it almost sounded like you were answering a challenge, whether or not you were Sasha Wolf.
Oh, yeah, because I was like, I am Sasha Wolf. Do you remember that old show? What the heck was it called? Remember, like, you had to guess who the real...
Oh, yes. I am so-and-so. I am so-and-so.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What was that called?
What was that?
Show was... I loved that show. Bring it back.
I imagine we just watched it in syndication, right?
I don't know. We were so young, but I just remember that moment where, didn't they say, like, will the real so-and-so stand up? Oh,
absolutely.
My God, that was so good.
Yeah, that show should come back. Somebody needs to reboot that.
Whatever it's called.
Yes, that's right. Let us know what that was called.
Yeah, please. Somebody help us out. Anyway, well, I am Sasha Wolf, I'm pretty sure. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You know, not much to report from our last show, which is good. Because, just, keeping it going.
Okay, status quo.
Yes.
That's all right. Nothing wrong with a little status quo.
Mm-hmm.
I was upstate. I'm back, but we had a little bit of a challenge upstate because last winter the snow was so deep that I created like this. I don't know if I said this on the podcast last year, but I created like a highway road system for Peanut in the woods. Like I spent days with this huge wide shovel, digging out these like roadways and pathways so Peanut could run all through the woods, because otherwise the snow is too deep and she'd have to just walk, behind me, right. Like in my footsteps. We did do some of that until I made her this highway system. But this year, it wasn't that deep, but it had this like ice crust on top. Right. So she was constantly sort of getting punked. Like she would go out and she'd be like, walk, fall. And you would break and she would fall through. And she would sort of look around like, who's doing this to me?
Yes.
Why a little bit of a challenge.
Or is it, why are you doing this to me?
Right. Yeah. What's happening?
Right.
Anyway, that was definitely a different kind of challenge, but it was beautiful nonetheless. Mm-hmm. But nice to be home. Anyway, so we have a great show. In fact, as I said to you before we started recording just now, that when I was listening back to the edit you did, I had to stop at one point because I just got very emotional, which I don't know that that's ever happened before. Yeah. Maybe once or twice, but it's a really moving episode. So it's with Dr. Kenneth Montague, who is the curator of the Wedge Collection. It's his collection, and he has a sort of private and then public arm of this, but he's one of the largest collectors of photography by Black artists from around the world. And Aperture has published this book called As We Rise, Photography from the Black Atlantic, of part of Ken's collection. And so we talk about the collection and how it got started and what he's doing now and whatnot. And anyway, he's extremely charismatic. He's a great storyteller. So he's really fun to talk to and like those guests. Anyway, if you don't mind indulging me for a second, I wanted to just read off a few notes here for folks. So there is going to be, this doesn't come up in the talk with Kenneth, but there will be an Aperture-sponsored book signing for the book at a newish gallery down on the Lower East Side called Hannah Traore Gallery. On the evening,
that's exciting.
I know, it's on February 23rd. I'm sadly not sadly, but anyway, I'm not going to be in town. I got to go support Christine Potter's event, but otherwise I would be there February 23rd. It's a presentation of the Jamaica Art Society, and you can get more details about that on the collection's website, which is just wedgecollection.org.
Well, I'm going to bring my book.
Yeah, definitely. And also there will be a touring exhibition of selected works from the book that's going to be starting this coming fall. It's going to start at the Art Museum at the University of Toronto and then move on. So it's really exciting. A lot going on. Anyway, great episode. And it's just thrilled to get a chance to talk to Kenneth.
Yeah. You know, just saying the title, As We Rise, Photography from the Black Atlantic, I want to jump in and talk about what he said about the title. Every part of this is so good.
Yeah.
Every aspect of, from explaining the Wedge Collection to the book to the title of the book, it's just an amazing episode.
Yeah.
I loved listening to it while I was editing. And Dr. Montague has this very mild-mannered way of talking about these very important things. And, you know, by the end of it, I just want to be on Team Dr. Montague.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, you said to me, you've never said this before. You actually said to me that when you were editing, you kept forgetting that you were editing and you were just listening. And then you'd have to go back to, you know, because you're cutting out like any distracting background noises or coughing or saying too many times or things like that. And that you've never said that. I mean, you have honestly never said that to me. So
Right, because, you know, editing is sort of the two halves of my brain. Right? There's all this just making sure there's, you know, it sounds good and like you said, taking out the noises and things, but there's also, you know, making sure the story flows. And I just kept getting lost in the story. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, it's really great. It made me so happy to hear that. Anyway, well, without further ado, then why don't we get to it? Michael, if you don't mind, please take it away.
My pleasure. And here's your conversation with Dr. Kenneth Montague.
Dr. Kenneth Montague. Kenneth, welcome to the PhotoWork podcast. Thanks so much for doing this with me today.
Hey, great to be here with you, Sasha.
So we've sort of known each other a teeny tiny minuscule amount because I'm an art dealer and you're an art collector. So our paths have crossed, but it really is wonderful, not just to have you on the show, but I've really enjoyed, you know, the deep dive into your collection, and the genesis of that, of course, is this new book that you've published with Aperture, As We Rise, which is a portion of your vast collection is reproduced in this book, and we're going to obviously get way into that, but we start with everyone's biography and origin story, as I say. So if you could just give us a sense of where you came from.
Okay, well, I was born in Windsor, Ontario, which is the southernmost city in Canada, and it's right across the river from Detroit, Michigan. And my parents were immigrants from Jamaica, early immigrants, I have to add. I mean, in terms of that community in Canada, I mean, we were probably the second Jamaican family to arrive in a city of, 150,000 or something. So always feeling like an island, as you can imagine, like from the islands, but going to a new kind of island. I was like, the deal. I was like the only black kid in the class, and it was a very kind of white Canadian town. But then interestingly, we were right across the river from Detroit. So, and of course, Detroit, in the time that I grew up, I was born in the 60s. So, I was sort of like a 70s kid with Detroit. My older brother taking me to see Shaft, the movie First Run, and I was underage to see that. But, these are the memories I had. And like, as a 10-year-old, I think I saw a beautiful photograph at the Detroit Institute of Arts by James Van Der Zee, that sort of iconic image of the couple in raccoon coats, Harlem Renaissance. It's like 1930s. They've got the great kind of sophisticated sort of vibe happening with the fur coats and the Cadillac with the white wall tires and the Harlem brownstone in the background. And I just had not seen images like that of, the Black community, certainly of African Americans, because, I was growing up in an era where it was like, TV shows like What's Happening Gang or Good Times. And they were funny shows, but, I think our family kind of laughed at those shows rather than with those shows. We were like, this is not our experience, being Black in North America here, and pretty middle class sort of upbringing. And I think seeing that image, it was very aspirational for me. I was like, this is who I want to be. I never quite got that sophisticated with, the dress and the, the brownstone and everything. But I certainly knew, hey, this is a new way forward. There are other ways of being Black in America, certainly. And I kind of took that image and wanted to really have a longer conversation with it than seeing it on the walls of a gallery. It was like a starting point for me to sort of start looking at encyclopedias back then and magazines like Ebony and Jet and Essence, and sort of started thinking more broadly about Black American culture. And it was really through the lens of art. Like, I was very lucky to have parents who were not only taking us to, ball games, see the Tigers play at, Tiger Stadium in Detroit, so we were going to baseball games, and we were going to music concerts, and we were going to the Detroit Public Library and the Historical Society and the Detroit Institute of Arts, where I also got blown away by that Diego Rivera mural, which you can imagine as a little kid is just like looking at, heaven itself. So I had a really great kind of entree, into the whole art thing. Both parents were, I wouldn't say they were academics, but my mom had gone to New York University and studied home economics, which, was for women only, and then became a nutritionist. And my dad was a teacher who went to University of Toronto and then couldn't get a job as a Black teacher in Toronto, and then went to Little Windsor and, kind of had this, they had incredible Canadian sort of story. Their experience is probably mirrored by so many other immigrants. It's like you really have to kind of put your head down, deal with the microaggressions, deal with the flat out racism, and kind of have your eyes on the prize. So, interestingly, the title of that new book featuring works from my collection from Aperture is As We Rise, which is really a phrase that my late father would say all the time. It's like lifting as we rise. As we do well, we have to kind of pull up others in our own community. And I think Aperture sort of saw the parallel with, what I've been doing with my collecting activities. So that's a little bit of a background. And I guess I should probably add that I became a dentist, like a good immigrant son. It was like the choices were doctor, dentist, or lawyer. And sure enough, my brother didn't become a doctor, but my sister is a lawyer. She's a judge, actually, so there it is. But I think if you, follow your heart, you kind of end up where you're going to be. And I might have been an artist. I might have been a curator. I had a great love for it. But in my life, becoming a dentist, it gave me the means and the access to actually start having longer relationships with artwork than seeing it in magazines and in galleries. So I started collecting probably around the time that I graduated. By the early 90s, when I started my dental practice, I was regularly going to galleries. And if I had a dental convention at the Javits Center in New York, I'd make sure to, go down to Soho at the time and see works in galleries. And it became a kind of a lifestyle,
I mean, I really wonder, do you think you would have gone to, if things were different, you would have gone to art school?
It's a tough one. I also loved and still love music and studied music at Little University of Windsor before I got into University of Toronto's dental school. It was actually my undergrad. And in the same week I got into dental school, the band I was playing in, a little reggae punk band called Contradance, we had our little single called Black Preppies, and that was on the radio locally. And, we got a record contract the same week I get into dental school. And I also got into a school of music at McGill School in Montreal. So it was sort of like, music really seemed to be the destiny. But then again, I think the predictable, safe route for the immigrant son was like, be a doctor. So I ended up, doing dental school. And I think it was a tough, tough go, because my sensibility was so different than my classmates. But then it's become, a pretty wonderful thing. In downtown Toronto, we have this dental practice where, I see all kinds of entertainment people, musicians, artists. I'm the go-to dentist for
Right.
that community. So, it's a fun job for me, and I get to sort of hang out with like-minded people. And there's a creative, kind of component to it as well. So it's kind of worked out, but it was a long process of, self-actualization, as they call it.
Well, as someone who has played music their whole life, I do have to just ask you what instrument you played.
At school, I was playing trombone, and I loved jazz trombone, and I played a little bit of, kind of those horn charts, those reggae horn charts in a little ska band when I was at university. But the kind of reggae punk band that we ended up forming, Contradance, I was the singer, songwriter, guitarist, and so I still play guitar and bass, and it was a fun time, I have to say.
You're an artist. I mean, it's just called.
All my friends are artists. I don't know too many dentist friends.
You're an artist. Yeah. You're an artist. That's it.
Yeah, well.
That's it. Well, you'll appreciate. I went to my first risking of COVID was I went to see David Byrne, American Utopia, last night. So if I get COVID, I'm just going to say it was worth it.
It's so great. Actually, we saw it at the in Toronto here at TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival. It opened the festival last year, and it was, of course, because of social distancing, it was like a drive-in thing outdoors, which was also really fun to kind of watch. David Byrne's, entourage at the drive-in. It was cool. It was,
yeah, I'm sure that was amazing.
Yeah, all praises to Spike Lee, who directed that one. It's a really good movie, actually.
Yeah, I love those music movies that at some point, they're so well done, at some point you forget you're at a movie and you start clapping as if you're at a live show. Yeah. So you start collecting, and are you collecting... I think as I said to you before we started recording, I haven't had a collector on the podcast yet. And so I really want to sort of drill down a bit on what makes a collector and how these things start and how they evolve. So are you collecting with anyone's guidance? Are you just going with what you like or love? Are you thinking of a bigger picture? It's going to be a collection of Black photographers. Are you when you start, what are you thinking about?
Wow, great question. Well, I guess I should go back to my start with kind of having that longer relationship with art. I actually opened a kind of a commercial gallery in my home, which was this wedge-shaped space, a kind of a loft in downtown Toronto, an old knitting factory that a few of us got together and kind of bought it as a co-op. And so that place had, 17-foot ceilings, and it was literally a living room that started at 4 feet and went to about 15 feet, and it was about 50 feet long, and that was the Wedge Gallery. So, the artwork was put up, and, I would have a Sunday afternoon salon, and the first one was a Black Canadian artist, Michael Chambers, but very soon we did a international show featuring the work of James Van Der Zee, and brought his wife up. The artist had passed away, but his wife Donna Mussenden Van Der Zee was a guest, and we had about 300 people come through my living room basically on a Sunday afternoon. And I thought, gosh, we've sold 8 of 10 works, and I've got a commercial gallery and I'm a dentist. So it was this thing that kind of, careful what you wish for, but, but very quickly after maybe 4 or 5 years of that and bringing, various local and mostly international artists to Toronto, I realized, I'm much more comfortable kind of as a storyteller, and that I really love that aspect of putting the work together, but not selling it so much. And I recognized, I wanted to kind of stay with this work. And every show I would buy 1 or 2 or 3 from the artist. And by the time we got to Jamel Shabazz in maybe 2003, because this all started 25 years ago, like 1997, it was like, this is too big for my house. We moved it to a local gallery. So it became this nomadic concept from the start, this Wedge Gallery. And And we had 800 people, and it was this big media event. This is when Jamel kind of had that book with Powerhouse back in the days, and it was just a moment for him. And we were the first Canadian gallery to show his work. And, it was obvious to me that, I would rather kind of do curatorial work or at least organize my own collection, to be shown. And it kind of was Thelma Golden from the Studio Museum, who's become a good friend over the years. I think around that time, maybe around year 2000, she introduced me at a Studio Museum opening to a collector in New York as one of Canada's great collectors of Black artists. And I thought, gosh, I'm a collector. Like, I hadn't even really thought of myself like that. And, she took me aside after that and said, Ken, with your art project, Wedge, you've been bringing the global local to Toronto. You should start, bringing the local and making it global. Like, take your stories and the artists that I know you must love in Canada and start showing them to the world. And I had wanted to do that, but it really took Thelma's kind of, blessing to sort of go, yeah, I love, my Black Canadian artistic practices are all around me, all these great artists. I need to show this to the world. And so we had a show with Dawit Petros, who was, an immigrant from Eritrea and grew up in the prairies in Western Canada and Saskatchewan, and went to art school in the French-speaking part of Canada in Montreal, and then went to America and, has that typical Afropolitan kind of lifestyle of a lot of contemporary artists. And he's become, a big name artist, but we were kind of the first to show his work, and I collected a bunch of it. And at that point, I realized maybe 2006, it's two streams. My life's heading into two streams in terms of art. I have this privately owned Wedge Collection, and then I have a curatorial project, Wedge Curatorial Projects, and that became a nonprofit, with a charitable number, and we get donations and we get sponsorship from corporations and the government, and that one we I use that over the years to kind of increasingly bring into the fold emerging Black Canadian artists. And so it's the two streams, Wedge Collection, Wedge Curatorial Projects, but it's out of something that was very personal, a gallery in my home. So that's kind of how it started. And
when you first started, who were the first, let's say, 10 artists you collected? There's two things that are running through my head right now that I'm interested in. One of them is why photography, and the other is I almost wonder if you were, I have a tendency to throw in psychoanalysis at some point and with my guests, so I apologize, but I almost wonder if your connection to Black America, because, it sounds to me like there was an early connection to Black Americans in the United States.
Yes, definitely.
Because of your connection to Detroit, that somehow maybe you felt more connected to Black Americans in some ways almost more than Black Canadians.
Well, interesting. That's a really good point. Interestingly, I had so much, well, it was so pervasive, the media living right beside a dynamic city like Detroit. I mean, again, I grew up,
I'm sure.
Like Black Power movements. I did a talk the other day with Kwame Brathwaite Jr. We were talking about Kwame Brathwaite, the photographer, his, work with Black is Beautiful and the Grandassa models. And, that stuff was happening, in the 70s in Detroit too, like those fashion shows.
And you already said you're like the only Black family where you were in Canada. So I can imagine that you felt more of a connection to...
Well, yeah, my father was doing graduate work at Wayne State University in Detroit, and he did, industrial arts. And my mom was... getting her hair done at the House of Beauty, if you can imagine one of those American, 1970s salons with, all the women getting their hair done with this bouffant style. And, I remember sitting on the steps of the House of Beauty with my sister, and, a limousine pulls up and Diana Ross comes out, with like full regalia, with the white gloves. And,
my God,
this is the era of, it's sort of Motown Records, sort of in the heyday, and Marvin Gaye. So,
I can see how you're so influenced. That's fantastic.
I say that, and yet I'm growing up in a household there where it's like, images of the Queen, and there's all this sort of British love-hate because, that whole colonial experiment in Jamaica is a big part of it. Jamaica, receives its or fights for its own independence and gets that in 1962. I'm born just a little bit later in the 60s, and I'm like, there's that, again, strange duality, this love-hate with the Queen and the colonizer. So I think there's, as much affinity to UK, Black UK artists. Like when I started reading Stuart Hall and seeing all those great works of, early Black British photographers, that really was probably as influential as, the growing up stuff with Detroit. So I had a really interesting tricultural kind of upbringing with the Canadian scene happening too. And I was growing up in Windsor, which was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And so, I had my first job, I think, was in the museum world, was being a tour guide, a kind of a docent after school in high school at the North American Black Historical Museum in Amherstburg, which is outside of Windsor, and again was the narrowest part of the Detroit River where, slaves, enslaved people would be coming across at night and coming to that community. So I also benefited from a very small but very proud and very sort of really entrenched local Black community that were, descendants of these enslaved people. So it was a really, really potent mix, like where I grew up and when I grew up, it was so critical. I think all of those things are in the mix, not just Black America, although you're right. It was so pervasive in the media.
Well, it's interesting because so, you go out into these other realms of these touchstones and things that are getting in your head, but then you do, with obviously a little nudge from Thelma Golden, you do sort of then say, oh, wait, I'm in Canada and I'm surrounded by all these great Black Canadian artists. And so you start shifting, you're collecting a little bit, I guess.
It's true.
And so you don't have to answer this, but can you give us a sense of, I don't need an exact number if you even know it, but how many prints do you own? What are we talking about? Because I know my listeners will be interested in someone who's considered a big, important collector. Do they own 200 prints? Do they own 1,000? Like, where are you in that?
Well, it's more than 200. It's less than 1,000. I'm probably somewhere in the 400 to 500, range. And it's probably 80% of my Wedge collection is photography, but there's a lot of painting as well, and that's in the last 10 years that's really grown. Video work as well, and some sculpture even. So it's beyond photography, but I have to say that photography was my first love, and as someone who didn't have the academic background, I was busy with dental school, though I was always reading so much and going to local art openings and seeing work. I just think photography was, the easy way in. It was the art that was really of my time growing up, and so it was something I could sort of sink my teeth into, and it was an entry point, for contemporary art for me.
Yes. Well, we photo dealers are very unhappy with the fact that you've shifted your collecting, but we'll let you live. We will not punish you for that.
Oh, hey, buying photographs. Can't, it's not mutually exclusive. I still love my photography.
It's oh no, not Ken. Anyway.
Yeah.
So you've put together this incredible collection, and you're now, you're not just a collector, you're a collector curator. You may not have a position at a institution, but that's really what you're doing. And how does this book come to be that you've done with Aperture? I really am curious about many different facets of the book and its design and how it's laid out. But first, I'd love to know just, how it happened, how it unfolded.
Yeah, I met Chris Boot, who I'd always respected. I have a lot of his books in my collection. I should add that I'm a pretty big photo book collector, many, many hundreds of volumes. And, so, everything from, his Boot imprint, I loved those sort of very handmade looking books. And of course, Aperture, a big part of my collection, from Diane Arbus forward. Like lots of classic books
Yep.
in my book collection are from Aperture. So I respected both of those entities. And then, wow, Chris Boot has become the director of Aperture. So that was a thrill. And I was, visiting visiting the space in Chelsea a lot in the last 10 years and getting to know staff. I was a juror in Bamako, Mali, and the Bamako Encounters, one of the great Pan-African photography festivals a few years ago, and was on a bus with Denise Wolf, who ended up being the editor of the book. We met probably 2009, in Bamako, and I can imagine. Well, you can imagine the scene of having drinks in the blah blah club, after just visiting Malik Sidibe's studio, and I'm sitting there between Denise Wolf on one side and Martin Parr on the other side, and we're all kind of exchanging stories about photography from wherever we're from and what we're seeing. It's pretty great.
Yep.
So, I was establishing these relationships with people at Aperture and Kelly McLaughlin and others that, I'd been buying work from them. And then Chris Boot asked me to show my collection at home, works that were, are on the display in my house during the Art Toronto Fair maybe 4 years ago. And he was bringing his patrons and board from Aperture from New York to Toronto. And so, we had a great day, an afternoon here in my home. And I think, after that, we started having a kind of a tighter dialogue about, hey, it would be, people are telling me, Chris, that I should really do a book about my collection. What do you think? And, he would refer me to various, photography book publishers. And I don't think that Aperture was really at that time so serious about it. But I have to say, over time, the relationship grew, and probably a couple of years ago, we started talking more seriously about it. And he asked me to, send some sort of proposal. And I was very much about, a very didactic thing, like the way I collect, like thinking about it, like hairstyles or music and so forth. And I had maybe these 7 tropes, which I kind of laugh at now because it was, again, so kind of subjective and didactic. And of course, Denise Wolf, the editor, right away, she and her assistant, Lana Swindle, were like, well, let's think about this in a broader way. And they kind of thought, let's look at the works in your Wedge collection, these photographs through the lenses of community, identity, and power, which really are the 3 strong kind of tropes that when you really dissect the collection. And it was very instructive, very helpful between that conversation about, how to sort of look at the works and talk about them. And then another conversation about what the title means, which we talked about, that As We Rise, as a sort of a phrase in my family. And then the subtitle, Photography from the Black Atlantic, which really refers to the fact that in those early conversations with Aperture, it was kind of determined that almost all of my collection is, reflective of artistic practices that are peripheral to the Atlantic, the UK, West Africa, Brazil, the Caribbean, United States, Canada. And that really is a kind of reflection of my personal story in terms of, the legacy of slavery, movement of people in my family, and so that became that sort of working idea, the theme, this Black Atlantic, and thinking about different ways of being Black and different histories, multitude of stories from these various regions and over time. And so, it's a very inclusive book. And the third conversation we had was about contributors. And, we have a pretty wonderful local, writer, Liz Akiriko, who's a good friend and I've worked with before with my Wedge project. And she wrote beautifully for the book and did a great interview with me, and then, tapped Teju Cole, who she'd introduced to me, several years earlier. And he's been to my home and seen the collection, and he did this beautiful letter to the collector. You'll see at the front of the book. And Aperture, kind of asked me to, tell us who you love and who you think would really, talk about your work in a way that I think will be, bring more out. And, I was suggesting all kinds of names, and we ended up getting Deborah Willis and Isolde Braumeier, Zoe Whitley. These are people who I've known for many years and know the collection, and Tika Salmon, and some Canadian writers like Julie Crooks. I just feel so thrilled about the whole thing because it's such a personal project, and to see it get love from, people who, don't know me and my little collection in Canada is very heartening. And of course, the book came out in November of 2021, and a month later, Time magazine names it, one of the 20 best, photo books,
Yes, it
of
did.
the year.
Yep.
Which has been great for the book, but also, it's very validating to me, because I feel like the whole point for me was to bring in some of the other voices, like my beloved Black Canadian photographers, and put them, in dialogue with the more well-known Kehinde Wileys and Ming Smiths and others. So for that reason alone, I'm thrilled that the book's come to fruition, and so happy that we could talk about it today. It's great.
Well, I can tell you that I had to look up some of the, I had to look up, I don't know every photographer in the book, but I particularly had fun looking and getting to know some of the Canadian artists in the book. So I can tell you that, just putting aside that I knew I was going to be talking with you, as an art dealer who's always looking for, people I might work with, but also just I always want to know who's out there and it's part of my job to know who's making work and whatnot. I used your book as a resource. So it's having that effect. It's absolutely working in that way. And so I think it is just an incredible success on so many levels. And I think it's just a really beautiful project. I think, by the way, notice that Deborah Willis got the honor of getting to write about that wonderful James Van Der Zee photograph.
Yeah.
That was...
Yeah. I've known Deb since about 1999, and it's we brought her up to Toronto at that time for that Van Der Zee show. And, she wrote for kind of a self-published book called Flava that we did 10 years earlier. And it's just, again, it's very heartening for me, to kind of work with people who are really the authorities in the field. And it's great to sort of see a general public that gets excited about this work that, I've kind of been championing for 25 years and not really doing it, for everyone or anyone else. It was really a personal project that gained steam over the years. So yeah, it's pretty thrilling.
And something else that seems important to mention is it's not only, giving voice to these Black artists, but also Black critics and curators who are writing about the work, right?
Yes.
So that's also it seems to me, important component. I know that I was reading a little piece you did in Now Toronto by someone named Neil Price, and he asked you what your view is on the role of the Black art critic in supporting Black artists. I'm just going to read what you wrote. There's definitely a difference in the sensitivity and criticality of the Black art critics that Black art critics bring. We benefited on this book by having so many Black writers. As much as possible, I'm trying to work with Black people who have a certain knowledge to bear. There are times when critics can completely miss the point or a cultural reference. We feel strongly about the need for more Black writers. So you go on a bit, but I'll just stop there. But can you talk about that a bit? Because I think that's something that's, I'm stating the obvious, but that's really come up in the past number of years, particularly in the past couple of years. Can you talk about that and the importance of, because of course it's true that there are cultural references that are very important in some Black artwork that white critics just miss. So how do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, it's been a personal journey. I'm in my 50s, so I've gone through many years of visits to major institutions where I've been sometimes, beyond disappointed, like absolutely dumbfounded when, I will go to New York for, an opening at MoMA, say, 20 or 25 years ago, and had seen work in artist studios. I think of examples like Ellen Gallagher and other people who were coming up at that time that weren't yet, being shown in major institutions and were doing absolutely innovative work that was kind of, I could see even with my limited experience as an art lover that it was just on another level. And why are we not seeing these Black artists in these major institutions? Why are all these kind of commercial gallery shows, the big galleries, not showing these artists, that I'd also loved, that, had an important history that just wasn't being told. A great example is Barclay Hendricks, who became a really good friend. He died in 2017, but boy, we traveled to Jamaica together. I bought one of his great paintings well before he was picked up by a major gallery. And, I was sort of like, why aren't people seeing the greatness here? And and it took a long time for me to, kind of realize that it wasn't, so much being missed. It just wasn't even on the radar. It was like a deliberate sort of, it was really, at the root of it, long history of exclusion and kind of like maintaining a status quo where, and this isn't just for Black artists, it was a long history of white male artists that sort of are the ones to be given their praise and respected in the canon, and then everyone else was like in the category of other, whether you were a woman, gay, of color. It just was bananas to me that there was this other history that was sort of in this other compartment and not part of the main story. So it's been very, very beyond validating. It's like very, very heartening to me to see this as beginning. It's not over, but it's beginning to change. And I see that because, I'm a trustee at the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto, which is kind of our MoMA here. And, I see it on a micro level in our institution. I can kind of apply it on a macro level to everywhere, that, these ideas of how institutions show work, what they collect, it's beginning to change because the audience is demanding it, basically. Now that communication is sort of unprecedented, the way that we kind of disseminate information, not just social media, but in every way, it's just like the cat's out of the bag. You cannot put the genie back in the bottle. Like, you can't go back to the old way of doing things. There's too much great work that needs to be seen and celebrated. And so, my personal mission is really around collectors. I think we need more Black collectors. I've had years of being not only that island when I was growing up, but also the island in my life as a collector, going to international art fairs and always being that only Black collector in the room, and that's changing. But it's a slow process, and I'm on a mission to kind of make sure that Black folks on every level, not just people of means, but on every level, start understanding the urgency, the power, the importance of, keeping a little for ourselves, as I say. It's like ownership of artwork is essential in seeing work and being able to talk about it from a particular perspective. I think it's really important that we don't, miss this moment where Black artists are sort of moving to center stage in terms of the art market, and, have all that work leave the hands of the Black community. I mean, I think that, I think deeply about that, because not just in the sense of generational wealth and all that practical stuff about, investment, but also just spiritually, that work, it means something, I think, to me in a different way than it might for a collector that's outside of my community. There's a long kind of history that I've alluded to that I think is reflected maybe in a kind of a dialogue of the works in my collection. And I think that the way it's put together is very dependent, very much a part of who I am as a Black individual. So I think that, there are many more stories to be told and storytelling, to happen with, within other Black owned collections. So that's something that I'm really kind of pushing in very tangible ways, like getting together with other aspiring Black collectors and other people in the community who are investing in other things, stocks and houses and cars. And hey, like, what about art? Like, why are you not, thinking about this, an investment that you can love every day and live with, rather than, investing in some chain store or some other thing that is bringing you an income, but it's not something that you love, or it's not moving the dial forward. Because patronage is really what it's about. If we can kind of do this thing with love and care and kind of keep it in the community, wow, for me, that's something I think about more and more, because I have two young kids, two young boys, age 7, age 4. I want them to go to the AGO in Toronto and feel like the work that's on the wall in the institution kind of reflects who they are. I want them to have that singular experience I had with that, one work of a Black artist I saw at that time at the DIA, and it was burned in my brain. I want them to be able to have that. So, we work toward that in everything that we do. And
let me just, excuse me, I just want to clarify something for people listening. A lot of those, because you just said something really important, a lot of the artwork that you see when you go into a museum is a gift from a collector. So that's why it's so important. That's what connects when you say you want your boys to go into a museum and see work by Black artists. That work is going to get there not just because a curator finds the funds within the museum, but also because they either borrow or gifted the work from a Black collector or from a collector. That's you see when you go to museums, the tags underneath the artwork, a gift from, or on loan from. And so it is incredibly important to, if we're going to assume, or if, more Black art will be bought by, or could be bought by Black collectors, then you will see more work by Black artists in museums, period. Because that's the
that's
funnel.
the way
that's
forward.
How it works.
Yeah. I really appreciate you expanding on that and making that clear, Sasha. It's like, I can give a great example quickly about that. In Toronto at the Art Gallery of Ontario, again, as a trustee, I was asked by a Black curator, Julie Crooks, at that institution to take a look at work that was in a private collection in New York, the Montgomery Collection. And it's this sort of treasure trove of vintage, images, black and white images, mostly from the Caribbean in that colonial era, 3,000 plus items. And, I flew down to New York with, the chief curator at the AGO, and we spent an afternoon looking at this work. And Julie Crooks, the curator, and myself took it on as a mission to sort of work with Black and Caribbean folks of means in Toronto to sort of make sure that, we bought this work ourselves for the AGO. It was about a $300,000, investment. And we got a lot of people, when you look at those works now, which is part of a show called Fragments of Epic Memory that's on at the AGO. If you look at that work at center stage in that show of vintage and contemporary Caribbean artists, you see those names, and there's probably, 16 names, 20 names of different people, and they're all in my community, and I'm very proud of that. Like, we petition those people, and then they'll hopefully go on and buy more work that they will one day gift to the institution. So that's kind of how you
gave them an entry. Yes, I mean, look, the thing with the art world is this is like double intimidation, because the art world is intimidating for almost everyone to enter. So I can only imagine, or maybe I can't, but anyway, what it would be like to be the only Black person at an art fair or in a room or whatever, in an environment that is on the face of it intimidating. I mean, I can feel intimidated going into an art gallery, and I'm a gallerist. I mean, it's almost designed to make you feel freaked out. I mean, it can be so unwelcoming, and it can be really a difficult environment. And so I think what you're doing to try and sort of make the Black community that you're connected to be almost like their Sherpa is so wonderful, because people need that. Everyone needs that who's trying to sort of get into it, because often there's a way in which you walk in and you sort of scratch your head and you think, I don't get it. Am I not smart enough? Do I not have enough art history knowledge? Why are these people, staring at me in a way that makes me want to run for the exit? Like, it's a strange sort of.
Oh, no, I could literally tell you about being rushed out, like a poor little gallery girl having to be sent over to me by, an owner of one of these well-known photography galleries. Many years ago, I was, asked to leave. Like, this poor young woman is like, what are you doing here? And, I'm just looking at art and, can you please leave? And I was like, wow, like, I know that brutal experience, it happens.
Horrible.
And, I think things are changing, but I also hear from other folks in my community these stories even now. So I know,
of course,
that, there's a ways to go.
Oh,
and I have to say, I'm not alone in this kind of mission. I mean, Mark Seeley's got a great organization in London with, Autograph, and he's been championing Black artists and getting folks to sort of buy work in the community as well. And I mean, I came up with a bunch of people who I love. Some of them are not with us anymore, like Oakway and Wazer and BC Silva and others that really thought deeply about the challenges and, the joys of our own community beginning to sort of, let's say, lead the conversation rather than, wait for handouts. And I think, in my role as a collector is to work on that end. They were curators and they do their thing. But my thing is really at this point, hey, what can I do as a Black collector that's going to kind of move things forward? And I think it's about, creating more Black collectors.
Yeah, making people feel comfortable. And, I think it's very hard to fall in love with art when you're standing there feeling petrified. Right. So you need to feel at ease, comfortable to really absorb this thing that is, in many instances, of course, not all, some things are very, conceptual and heavily intellectualized, but so much of the work, and I know the work that you love and collect, is extremely emotional. And you have to be able to access those emotions, and that takes a certain amount of ease. And so creating ease and a sense of belonging and being welcomed, is so important for everyone. I mean, that's to me
well
so
said,
important
actually,
in the art world.
Yeah. It's so true.
Well, listen, we're sort of coming to the end here. I do think the book is just so beautiful, and I urge everyone to get a copy. And the way the text is interwoven is really, really beautiful. The text is not punishing, as text often can be. In fact,
a
really
photo book's got to be about the pictures, so, you have to have a strong writing. But I do think, and I'm going to cut in to say that, I didn't mention that, the choice that Aperture made about the designer of the book and choosing a woman named Jeanette Abink, who, I think she designed. Yeah, she did, Dwell magazine and all this sort of contemporary stuff. But she also, had this idea, a really beautiful gesture to sort of reach out to a emerging Black typographer, Trey Seals, with vocal type. And he kind of created this custom font that you see, with this As We Rise, like the logo form. It's kind of based on those handwritten signs, from civil rights movement, like, the sanitation workers with those I Am a Man signs. And that's kind of throughout the book in the chapters and in the titles. And it's just a really lovely gesture that book designer said, hey, let's go with, young Black,
I'm so glad you're mentioning that, because when you put that together with what you were talking about earlier about some of Denise Wolf's suggestions, I think you've also given people a really sort of woven into this conversation, a really clear idea of what it takes to make a book and how wonderful and important it is to be open to the suggestions of your team that is put together, because these people are great at what they do. And, sometimes we have an idea and someone else comes along and says, why don't you think about this? And the next thing you know, you're thinking, oh my God, of course course they're
Yeah.
right. How did I not think of that? But
Yeah. I'm super lucky because, I have a collection manager, Maria Canelopoulos, and another assistant, Emily Kronig, who've been with me, beyond a decade now. And they were part of that book team with Liz Akiriko. And so our Toronto team was strong. Like they kind of understand that it's my baby, but they gave great sort of suggestions that, balance the stuff that was coming from Denise and Lana. So I feel very lucky to be supported by the people
you had
around me. It was a
team
good team
of superheroes. Yeah.
It really was. Yeah.
Well, Ken, thank you so much. Really.
Oh, come on, Sasha. It was my pleasure. I enjoyed talking to you. And, we have a great relationship around art, and I look forward to sort of, connecting with you as, you've been a champion of many artists, including some who are in the book work that I purchased from your gallery.
Yeah.
So, I have to give you all praises too. You introduced me to some really great work too. So thank you.
A joy working with you and talking with you. So be well. And I look forward to the next time I'm up there or you're down here, and maybe we can get together. That would be wonderful.
For sure. Thanks so much, Sasha.
Okay. All right, Ken. Take care. Be well.
Peace and love. I'll see you.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The executive producer is Sasha Wolf, and our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. You can hear PhotoWork on all your favorite podcast platforms. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify, and be sure to subscribe on any one of those services or wherever you listen to podcasts.